You got collision. You're just packing air molecules into this little space. It's just like a traffic jam. That's what I think about it.
So are you saying like if you like trimmed it all the way, it would make you go faster for a second, but then eventually it would slow and make you go slower?
It gets a lot slower as time goes on, and that bears it out. When you're over trimmed, you can survive a little bit of over trimming, but if you stay over trimmed, you grind the hole.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Because also ask yourself this: if this is a low pressure region here and it operates perpendicular to the surface, that's actually pulling you backwards. Yeah.
Is that low pressure region the same or?
It's like this. Think about this. Think about this. The entire region is low. What you want to think about is like on a straight sail, or on a kind of conventional, like how we think about like what we normally sail with. You kind of think about the low pressure region like this, and it tapers down towards the end of the leech right here. If you have a very curved end of the leech, like that. Think about and this eventually becomes before high pressure comes around. I don't know. Making fun of me. All right. So how do we control this? I'm kind of thinking. Yeah, I mean, this is really like 4 or 5 clicks on the main sheet. On a mainsail. On a jib, it's much harder to control directly. You're really only trafficking and changing the angle of exit with altitude. So I don't mess with it as much. But it's less crucial on the jib. Why is it less crucial on the jib than is the main? Nope. Connect those ideas. Jib creates a low pressure region, right? What's at the back of the jib? A low pressure region. Does it need to decelerate as much? Nope. So, because it doesn't need to decelerate over the jib as much, the jib overproduces its fraction of sail area. Despite the fact that the jib is responsible for about 30% of sail area in a 420 and an FJ, it probably produces something more like 40-45% of the total force because it's more efficient. Because it doesn't have to decelerate slow. Yeah,
because then it starts going down.
This is an accelerating vacuum. Think about it sucking air over the jib at a faster rate than it ever else would. And then it just continues over the rest of it?
Okay, yeah. So there's no end.
Giant bubble.
Yeah. If you had this going on at the jib, what kind of a problem would you have? Major.
You'd have the weird region.
There's this like huge collision here, and you mess up the dynamics of the entire boat.
Well, you get that sometimes when you sheet in too hard with the jib on a 420, and you sheet too much, and then you get all crazy.
The way it really shows up is if your windward cheating at like 16, 17 knots and you're dumping mainsail, close the slot. Okay, major problem. That's exactly what I wrote about on Facebook with the FJ. Because as bad as the 420 has it, let's call this a 420. There's less overlap, right?
Yeah.
On an FJ?
FJs get that a lot more.
Yeah, on an FJ you gotta be real careful about that. Okay? So sail interaction is kind of where we are right now, and we kind of see how the sail's proximity to each other affects how much lift they produce. I'm talking about the jib, being the heavy hitter in terms of relative strength of the forces lift.
So you can overturn, like sort of overturn the jib just a little bit, and it's fine.
What would you trim to on a snipe? Ask yourself that.
Yeah.
Like, what's the visual target?
Oh well, I think at a certain point on the spreader.
Or maybe a landing's better. I don't know if you can't really see it on a snipe. You can see it in a snipe in light air because it's got a telltale coming off, or some of them, or maybe it was just audio repeater, whatever it is. they put a telltale off of each of the jib. So you can trim to keep that thing flying
Yeah.
cool. And you can just literally mess with it to keep it streaming. But in every boat I've ever sailed that has a jib leech telltale, the target has been streaming. So I don't know how much you can over trim it.
Yeah.
Maybe you can a little bit. I agree, I know where you're going with the concept, and I agree with you.
I feel like I trim a little bit like tighter than most of the people I've like sailed with.
Mhm.
I trim the jib a little tighter.
Maybe it's generating more force.
And
This is the kind of shit that they worry about all day long, right? Like those kind of things.
Yeah.
how high up, like when there's a telltale off the jib, how high up is the jib? Pretty high, right?
Yeah, it's in the top. It's in the top there.
And why is that?
Because that's probably the most crucial part for generating force in light air, especially.
So if you're sailing a boat like that, just because I've sailed flying Scots at home where there's a window in the very front of the mainsail, like halfway up maybe, so you can see that telltale on the jib. So as a skipper, what are you looking for and not just having flying straight back?
As a skipper, I'm not looking for shit. I'm sailing the boat.
Okay, what do you
as
have
a
as a
crew, I'm trying to keep that thing streaming straight back all the time. There's a kind of a compromise here, though, and we'll talk about that. To get this pretty straight, it kind of affects how curved the sail can be. Right? If we want a lot of depth, we're going to get a lot more return at the leech. Like a fuller, you guys see how that works? It's like, let's take two sails. This guy, this flat guy, has a nice straight run at the back. Let's make this guy fat. This guy's got a lot more return at the leech, right? The fatter sail has the chance to generate more lift, but it also has problems if its leech creates an issue back there. So in moderate wind, right before we get to design wind, you're kind of playing a game of risk management in terms of like that extra little bit of trim you get to return the top batten to make that sail full. You know, like, do you guys ever feel like you kind of get a little bit of extra power, you get a little bit of extra trim going on the mainsail, like 8 knots initially? Makes it deeper, so you might get a little bit more force coming out of it. But if you generate the problem back here, you've got a major issue. So the way that we kind of manage that is by watching how frequently this thing turns around. And most people talk about having it alternating between streaming back and reversing along the backside of the leaves about 50% of the time. Sometimes more, you know, the lighter it gets, probably the more I want to see this than that. Wind is different. Wind is a different situation because we're not trying to maximize lift only. Remember how I said I framed this all moderate air? Moderate air, we got one objective: maximize lift. Okay. There's a nice little equation called Helmholtz. Which holds vorticity can neither be created nor destroyed. Cannot be created nor destroyed. What does that mean? You guys know when you like stir a cup, put the spoon in there, or put your hand in the bathtub, swirl it around. There's a vortex, and it spins one way, clockwise, counterclockwise. There's always a couple of other vortexes that spin the opposite direction. You're in like the outflow, sometimes they come in at the end, and then they all disappear. And viscosity wins and destroys the vortex. Right? Helmholtz's equation says that you can't create or destroy those things. So if you get a clockwise circulation, you're going to get counterclockwise. And you can see it everywhere. If we could do it in here without getting kicked out, or if any of you guys smoked, we could sit here with a cigarette, just let the thing filter up here, run our hand through it, and you'd see 2 different vortexes. Why is this important? If we're bending air here, we're creating vorticity. We just put a curve in the airflow. So there's going to be another curve of airflow going in here. It rises off the back of the sail. This is kind of like the latent force we were talking about before, but it's there all the time. Okay, the question is how strong it is. It's there all the time. And the reason why, if you think about it, is because there's always going to be attraction from even neutral air pressure to the low region. This force here, that muddles up the picture for all the variety of reasons we discussed, is responsible for the largest portion of the sail's aerodynamic drag. There are other forces. I mean, like, there's obviously skin friction with the air molecules against the sail fabric itself. There were probably a bunch of other forces I haven't described that generate aerodynamic drag, but this is the big one that most people talk about in the context of sails, wings, all the rest of that crap. So we got a lift-drag relationship, which is to say, when we get more lift, we get more drag. We have the Tom Wilson's equation. What you're trying to do is optimize the amount of lift and drag you're getting. Below design wind, wherever that is for you, here's the sort of combined crew rate. You know, for me, when I was like 155 pounds with my 130-pound crew, probably around like 12, 13 knots. For others, for smaller pairs, less. Below that line, you're always trying to maximize lift. Because what you're getting in lift is generally, in terms of trying to set the sails up to go fast, what you're getting in lift more than offsets the drag. As soon as you hit design wind, though, you can't handle any more lift. You can't. It's capped out. You guys remember how we talked about this force? It's got drive and healing moment. If you only produce this much riding moment, there is no additional amount of lift you can harness. So as lift goes up, it's effectively unusable. At that point, we start to think about capping lift and minimizing drag as a way to go faster. This will surprise you, most boats go faster in 15 knots than they do in 20, keel boats. Because at 15, they don't have as much, you know, they've capped out their lift at what, 10 or 11 or 12 or whatever it is, and they're depowering to deal with drag. But at 20 knots, they're still trying to depower. They've got all this drag coming from the 20 knot airflow. Not cool, right? So below design wind, this is kind of critical, 11 knots or so. We're looking to max lift above, we're talking about minimizing. That sets the stage for talking about how we depower sails. So there are some things we can do. There are really 4 ways that I know of to depower sails. Some of them are technique, some of them are tuning. By technique, I mean it's something that you do with the running controls. It's an active process involving straight line sailing. By tuning, I mean it's something that you do to the static controls to change the sail shape. Who's got this? Ease main to do what? Who tried ease main? Ease main to do what? No. But we talk about all these forces, right? You're easing main. What does easing main do for you? We talk about depowering. We're trying to cap lift and minimize drag. What does easing mainsail do for you? It expands windward separation bubble, right? And as the windward separation bubble expands, we get decreased lift. So deliberate luffing. And why is that preferable to deliberate stall? Because when we deliberately luff, you know how I talked about this can longitudinally expand sequentially, partially? It can luff a little bit, then luff a little bit more, luff a little bit more. We can gauge it to however much we need to depower. In the stall, when we start the stall, the longitudinal expansion is rapid. We go from a little bit of stall to tons of stall real fast. And besides that, the high pressure region of the sail isn't responsible for most of the force, right? The low pressure region is. So if we keep flow over this side, we're still going forward. That's why deliberate luffing works. What else we got? Line on the sail. Okay. For the reasons we discussed, if we have less curve, we have less of a distance differential, we have less acceleration, we have less lift. And we have less drag because we have less lift. Make sense? Helmholtz's equation. This is in the same subspecies of crap people talk about conservation advantage, which we come back to. What's 2 and what's 4? That I'm not sure is depowering. That just changes the direction of lift suction. And there may be some depowering element there, but I'm not. Yeah, we'll put that 10 next to this number 5. Because as that pocket does go forward, you get more forward suction on the side. Yeah, that's different than deliberate luffing, right? The reason why it's different is you're changing. Remember how we talked about the relationship with A to T and C? You're changing it but from the different side, and the sum effect is to decrease the crossbow force load. So you're heading up when you're going upwind, just intuitively, it takes away a little bit away of the forces pushing across the boat. When you're going down, when we get hit by a big puff downwind, and maybe the FJ isn't the best boat for illustrating this point, but say in a 29er, you want to bear off. like fast, otherwise you're going swimming. So that's important. Number 4. I mentioned this when I said this, right? Healing moment is the sideways force, but it is expressed over what? Sails, they're pretty tall, right? Decrease vertical leverage. How the hell would we ever do that? We could do that, and you're in the right avenue, right? Because we're talking about deliberate luffing as a mechanism. We can deliberately luff the top of the sail, and that's a depowering technique, isn't it? But if we let the bang out on the mainsail, we'd have this massive piece of fabric flapping in the wind, right? We would lose the entire integrity of the sail shape.
Could you explain what vertical leverage is?
Okay. So we got the sailboat, right? The force produced by the sails, all the lift, there has to be an average point of production for the lift for the entire sail. If every square inch of sail has potential to generate lift, then we got some lift being produced back here, we got some lift being produced up there. There's got to be an average position in here, right? For where the sail's force is expressed on the boat. Call that the center of effort. Call it right there. Countering that, we have lift being produced by the blades, which we've also discussed. How both the rudder and the stemboard produce lift. And that's going to be right here. We have a vertical distance between these two quantities. And the longer it is, the more that boat is going to want it to boat. Which makes sense. If the FJ's mast was 40 feet tall instead of 20 feet tall, can you imagine hiking that son of a bitch down? It would suck. We can't change the mast height, but we can certainly change what parts of the sail are producing lift. So that's where Matt's suggestion about blowing the bang came from. That's good. That's in line with what we're trying to talk about here. This entire first part of the conversation, and I did not really want to talk about control, I want to talk about the forces we're dealing with. Right? We talked about, but now I'm asking a question which, control lines are separate. We can't effectively luff the top of this thing without losing the entire sail, but we can effectively luff the top of the jib, and that doesn't hurt us too much. And that's why it's fast to put those fair leads back when it starts to get breezy. In the FJ. But as the fair leads come back, the sheeting angle gets more horizontal. You're no longer putting any downward force on that leech. It flops over. And it luffs. And resultantly, the center of effort goes from up here to down here, and you've reduced the leverage. You can also do that in the real breezy stuff in the 420. You guys ever saw a collegiate regatta where it was like 25 plus, and you see people deliberately letting off to higher tension? That's when the shit has hit the fan. Alright? I mean, it happens enough times. But yeah. The reason why is because in raking back, you open up the slot, you're going to luff the top of the jib. You're going to expand the wing separation bubble, if not luff it. And that's going to effectively decrease the vertical leverage of the sail.
Did you say there's only direction?
Huh?
Did you say there's only direction?
The same principle applies on both the FJ and the 420. In the FJ, you can do it, you can keep your rig tension and do it by moving the fair leads aft, which is infinitely preferable to what you have to do in the 420. In the 420, you take off the rig tension and you allow the mass to rake back, which helps in some sense. But as soon as you decrease that rig tension, you're just like, oh God, how am I going to replicate that rig tension? We have to go to the bank. Talk about that later. Again, this is getting, it's so easy to go off a whole bunch of different things. Matt, what's up? No, it's lowering it. Yeah, if we don't have any more lift produced from up here, that's got to affect our average position, right? If our average position was up here when this thing was drawing air, and we all of a sudden start to deliberately luff this, yeah, our center of effort is going to go down. And the total lift force is going to decrease, but that's kind of more in, it's a different kind of depowering. It's not, that's not number 4. Number 4 is upward leverage. That's one way to go about this. There's another way to go about that.
Wait, in the 420,
Yeah.
you could just put on a whole bunch of limerick sheet and that would open up the leech anyway. So what?
Wait.
Wouldn't we be closing off the leech?
Close it on the
Twisting.
bottom.
It would be twisting.
It would close it on the bottom.
Yeah.
Because it would pull that part in, but wouldn't that let the top open a little bit more?
I don't know. What I do know is that I haven't. That's interesting. It's probably worth experimenting with the next time any of us are in 420s, collegiate and big breeze. Like I'd experiment with that because what Kira's talked about is rules of isometric deformation. Something that's called Gaussian curvature. You apply tension on one part of a static fabric, and another part of it has to loosen. Which is why when you increase your luff tension, your leech opens up. Okay. And what she's postulating is that somehow, and I think this is worth asking. I don't know whether or not this works or it doesn't. I honestly have no idea. By putting on some kind of windward sheet down here to return the sail up here, you might get it to open up a little bit more.
But this is for volume. Wouldn't it just increase the low pressure area on the other side?
Depends, but again, this is not. This is something that we have to test. I don't know how to teach it inside this framework, and I'm not sure whether it might be effective. What I do know is that when you have 20 knots of airflow here, you're generally trying to do everything you possibly can to widen this thing. You have a lot of air pressure going through it. If you close that thing, you start to get massive problems with. You remember how we talked about this situation? Just totally messes up the entire. Mess up the dynamics of the mesa. Getting back to where we were, there were 2 ways to mess with vertical leverage. Talk about one way, what's the second way? It's on the board. Huh?
It's on the board.
It's on the board, it's on the boat.
Is it?
Yep. We can decrease the vertical leverage by kicking the centerboard up. Which in big breeze, when you see people starting to let the tension off up here, they're also kicking their centerboard up 2 or 3 inches. That's what all the 470 guys do.
See, people do that in 420. I've never seen people do it in match.
Why? The FJ is designed for better sailors. Generally speaking, designers will put extra area in the blades for beginners because it's easier for them to track forward. It's easier to ride the boat. It's more stable. When you start to reduce it, and you don't need all the lift that you get off the 427 board, strictly speaking. You need it most of the time, or it's efficient most of the time. But when it gets windy, you don't need it. Pick it up. And that kind of also accommodates the rake back effect that you get when you let that rig tension go. Because as the centerboard comes up here, the CLR goes back with the CE and you maintain that. That's how you keep neutral. So like as you, in a 420 and 470, as you start talking about raking back, you have got to adjust the centerboard to make sure that the CLR complies. I don't know how they accommodate that in the snap.
Can you spend another day on fix a sail in heavy cruise?
We'll talk about that. We're not there yet.
I thought you said, did you say use the van in big cruise?
No.
I was like,
So Matt had the right idea, but Matt wanted to talk about easing the bang off the top of the mainsail. We can't do that because if we ease the bang in big cruise, we lose the entire mainsail. We have a quilt flogging in the wind. It's not letting us go anywhere. What we can do is relax leash tension here and muff the top of the jib. That is effective. Because if we ease jib higher tension,
interesting.
yeah, jib higher tension.
What happens if the fact that that would move the center of her back too?
When you rake back, that's why you have to move the centerboard back with it.
Oh no, I meant just the fact that you're left on the top of the jib. It move the center of her back.
As soon if I'm thinking about it would move the center of her back. And as soon as I'm talking about in a collegiate boat, taking a couple inches off that jib halyard, I'm also talking about. In fact, probably before I was talking about raising the centerboard to accommodate.
Okay.
So that works out because it does move up. All right. Are we cool through all this so far? There's one more aspect of sail interaction we haven't discussed. It's upwash and downwash. And I'm not going to give you the most comprehensive explanation of this. But you don't know, it will probably mean the working speed level is much better. Got a question? Jib figure lead? It's out here. It's like 1.5 foot outboard, right? The mainsail figure lead, if there was one, is smack dab on the center line. Does that ever strike anybody as odd?
You can move it on bigger boats.
You can, but there are enough boats where you can't that this should strike people as kind of strange.